6:26, welcome back to First Up this Tuesday morning. It is Tuesday, February 7th. Right now we focus on the much contentious and in the main media right now, the issue of the resumption of hangings. We have Leela Ramdeen, attorney at law and a member of the Catholic Commission for Social Justice, talking about the death penalty and the possible resumption of hangings and a human approach to it. Leela, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Welcome.
Have we seen you for the year yet?
No.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy Carnival. This issue is one it's never going to go away.
Yes.
It's seemingly in human civilization. It will always come up in various jurisdictions, depending on, especially, crime rates in concert with crime rates,
Yes.
and people trying to get a grip in terms of being a deterrent. Your opening thoughts as to the death penalty. Are you an advocate for or against?
I'm an advocate against, as a Catholic. That's the teaching of our church. But let's also take it out of the Catholic context to a wider context. We must remember what the United Nations asked all nations to do. In 2007, 2008, 2010, they asked all countries to have a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to abolishing it, and to, on the way there, to restrict the kind of murders that the death penalty will be the result of. Sadly, our English-speaking Caribbean countries voted against that moratorium. Tomorrow, we have been launched right here in Trinidad and Tobago, the UNDP's report on citizen security in the Caribbean region. I attended previous consultative sessions, and I know some of the recommendations will look wider than the death penalty. So there are areas that we need to look, and it's not only a religious issue, it's a civil issue and civil rights issues too. Let's look at what happens here in Trinidad and Tobago. From 2002 to 2011, we've had over 3,700 murders, I think. And there are about 42 to 44 people on death row. That alone, that statistic alone, should tell us that we're not catching those who perpetrate heinous crimes. And that is another issue we need to look at. So are we dealing with the causes, the root causes of in terms of serious crime in our country? And have we got a criminal justice system that's really apprehending those who perpetrate these crimes? Though rather than just bay for blood, we need to map out where we are as a country, what are the root causes, and deal with it. Our new Archbishop has just said that last week on his TV program, Shepherd's Corner, that we need to come together and look at the root causes if we are to address crime. Just asking for the death penalty, knowing that we have very long processes. Our justice system, Amy Anamuntodo was killed since 2005. Her alleged killer is now before the courts, 2012. So that tells you how long it takes for the processes. We also need to look at why, in fact, the English-speaking Caribbean countries cannot find it difficult to implement the death penalty in any case. You will remember the 1994 case of Earl Pratten and Ivan Morgan, in which the Privy Council laid down strict guidelines as to the time limit for executing people who have been convicted. And they said that it should be within a 5-year period, otherwise it will be seen to be inhumane and inhuman, degrading treatment of prisoners. And so if someone is on death row for that period of time, their time must be commuted to life. There have been other cases that came up before the Privy Council after that showed even less than 5 years, the Privy Council found some reason to say, you can't execute. We know when Jeremy Brown, the MP from England, came over here, he made it clear, England is not into the death penalty, as we know. And so because of that, some say that the Privy Council will always find some reason to say, you can't hang. So as long as remain with the Privy Council, not to say that the Caribbean Court of Justice is going to be a hanging court, but we are part of the Privy Council, and we have signed up Trinidad and Tobago to international conventions, which is important also. These international conventions allow prisoners a right to appeal to those. So after you go through Court of Appeal and the Privy Council, they can appeal to those courts. We know what happened to Glenn Ashby a few days before the 5 years, while his he was still, his case was still being heard by an international court, the International UN Court of Human Rights. He was hanged, and legal luminaries in the region have said really that was illegal. So when we have processes like that where people have a right to these appeals, we know how long it takes, and the 5 years could pass. So that has made it almost impossible for English-speaking Caribbean countries to implement the death penalty. Given all those facts, it is sad that we're still giving the public the impression that we can hang, when in fact it's so impossible. So let's look at the wider issues that we can, what are the things that we can do? Yeah?
But there are people who would be listening to this conversation this morning right now and saying a few things, one of which is, it's the law of the land.
Yes.
It's on our statute books.
Yes.
And why can't we carry out the law of the land? That's one.
Yes.
Two, why do the wheels of justice turn so slowly? Why all of these impediments to carrying out the law of the land? Why don't attorneys become more efficient and magistrates more effective in dispensing justice, so that we don't find a situation where, we have another person that taxpayers' dollars is going to fatten for the rest of their lives?
For the reasons I've just said as to why it is the law of the land, but I've just given you the reason. Once Pratt and Morgan, Barbados, have actually ousted Pratt and Morgan by changing their constitution. That's the only way you could do it. If you change the constitution, they said, even if there's a lengthy delay, it doesn't violate their constitution.
And with that said, and we all understand any country being signatories to international conventions.
Yes.
But very often with this discussion comes the discussion about judicial sovereignty.
Yeah.
And if we are indeed an independent country, we should be determining our own destiny. And the fact that we still pinch ourselves, and I know there are checks and balances, to what jolly old England says, when their circumstances, their resources, their judicial system deals with their situation and ours is completely different, it's really unfair to us. And it's really an indication that we may really not be as independent as we think.
But whose fault is that? We are still attached to the Privy Council. I went to the lecture that Sir Sridhar Ramphal delivered, the distinguished lecture series at the Hyatt. And he actually used a term that really made everybody laugh, that we should stop loitering on the doorsteps of colonialism. That is, we should move away from the Privy Council and join, there was a commitment that we would join the Caribbean Court of Justice. Only Belize, Barbados, and, which is the other country? 3 countries have signed up
their ties.
And Guyana have cut their ties with the Privy Council. We have not. So we cannot complain about the Privy Council, who we know. In fact, it's so bad, the law lords at the Privy Council level have actually sort of told us, oh gosh.
They've scoffed at us.
They absolutely.
And independent.
And in fact, what they're doing now, from what I understand, is no longer are they taking the law lords from the Court of Appeal. They even put in High Court people, judges on our Privy Council to hear our cases. That's how fed up they are. So as long as we in Trinidad and Tobago hold on to the coattails of the Privy Council, we can't complain that they're imposing their views on us. They've made it clear. So we also have to look at that. And I think the public need to recognize that. They're not imposing themselves on us. We have held on. We are loitering on the doorstep of colonialism.
So what you're saying is we need to I guess, have a referendum on what the public really thinks and possibly consider changing the Constitution to become more judicially independent. Because if we don't, it is extremely clear that England is against the death penalty.
Yes.
And whatever they can use, and they do,
yes,
to stall the cases, to get past the 5 years Pratt and Morgan statute, they will, because that's their perspective.
They made it clear. But I must stress again that this is not to say that if we become part of the Caribbean Court of Justice, that court will be a hanging court. We mustn't think like that. But I must also read a statement from Verna Rose-Graves to the Caribbean Media Corporation last January before she became a minister. She said, sometimes we must not do what may be popular, that's important, but what is right and in the best interest of our society. Our crime situation is where it is because so many of us have walked away from our history, our humanity, our responsibility, our caring, our commitment to nation building. And you know why I quoted that? I heard a senior politician recently on TV actually say, you know, people should be flogged, bring back flogging. Professor Spence rightly put in his column last week, when you think of the history of Trinidad and Tobago with slavery, where there was so much flogging of black people, to talk about flogging as a way forward is not.
But there are those who would argue that if you reintroduce the flogging, the recidivism that we're seeing in the prison system would drop. Nobody would want to return to prison to face that again.
Why you think there's flogging already? Why you think there is recidivism? Our recidivism, that means our reoffending rate, is about 66, 65, 67%. Do you know why? There's no proper rehabilitation of prisoners. Our commission started building a place to rehabilitate ex-prisoners, and now St. Vincent de Paul Society is running it at San Rafael. How many of those centers, how many government centers are there? I know Wayne Chance runs one. When you don't have opportunities, quite often prisoners, the wives leave them or the husband leave them and move on, and they come out, who is there for them? People are afraid. Fear has caused people to shut themselves out from even the ex-prisoners. People should have an opportunity for restoration, rehabilitation. The prison service said that they embraced since 2000, task force report, a restorative justice approach. How is that working? How many drug addicts are being rehabilitated in our prisons? What happens when they come out? It's so easy to fall back into crime when there's no safety net for you in society.
But there are many of those people who are in prison, and some of whom are on death row, who are unapologetic. They have no remorse for the crimes that they commit. As a matter of fact, they think it's their just due to do that. So if these people who do not understand what it means to be human, have no humanity, and commit inhumane acts against the rest of us, why should we extend mercy and compassion to them? I'm sorry, I'm being devil's advocate this morning.
You're right.
Yeah.
Our Archbishop rightly said recently that violence begets violence. And, you know, one of the things I looked up before coming here is the Death Penalty Information Center. Quite often people say that it's you know, that hanging people will be a deterrent. The Death Penalty Information Center shows for the last 10 years or so, the states in America that have, there are 34 states that have the death penalty and about 16 that don't. Those states that have the death penalty have a higher rate of murder than those states that do not. And people could just Google it up, then Death Penalty Information Center, to show that. So whether people are remorseful or not, the issue is society has a right to protect itself. Society has a right to protect innocent people. But like our catechism says, section 2267, that if a state can find non-lethal means to protect society by, for instance, locking away the person for life, without parole even, which happens, you know, there are about 139 countries that have abolished the death penalty in law practice. So our church says, if you can find some way, non-lethal way of doing this, the state should limit itself to that, because that is more in keeping with the common good and with the dignity of the human person. Because even those in prison, while they, you know how many prisoners, like the fellow who was just executed in America, he converted his life. He started, you know, preaching to those who have committed crime, but he remained in prison.
That's one person.
Yes.
And there's a different perspective that says, and I'm going to go back to your quote from Senator St. Rose-Graves, that the society has the right to decide what's in its best interest and what is right.
Yes.
And when you have a situation where a society feels literally held ransom by the criminal element.
Under siege every day.
You're seeing the callous and humane choices criminals make in terms of taking lives. It is very easy for society as a whole to decide, well, we need to take drastic steps because our circumstance, our situation demands that we forcefully take back our country.
Yeah, tell me how you, let me share with you how we'll take back our country. In August 2010, we sent a 2-page letter to every single MP and senator saying that, you know, not only is the death penalty wrong, but have we considered suggestions? We made a whole long list of suggestions. When we have an education system that's failing our children, 4,000 of them, as the minister said, have dropped out. Nobody knows where they are, which gangs they belong to, if any at all. If you have an education system that's not forming children's conscience, if the religious community, we're a very religious country, if you're not forming children's conscience, if there's no ethics or moral part of the curriculum, so that children are coming out, being able to enter society, knowing the difference between right and wrong. If we're not doing that, our education system is failing the kids. If we have a police service that's corrupt at various levels, and we know that is true, yeah? For 4 years, I was on the Police Service Commission. If we have a police service that's not working efficiently and effectively, then we also need to look at how we beef up the police service to address issues. We have no proper forensic detection. Our detection rate is only about 10%. So while, as I said, we're calling for the death penalty, of the 3,500, 700 or so murders.
But they're not mutually exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive. And very often when we discuss the death penalty, we seem to think, yes, we understand. We need to have proper resources given to education. Yeah. We need to have proper policing. We need to have a transformed police service. We need to have all the other...
Our judges are still taking notes, no caps.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that while we fix all those things and we put those things in place, we cannot have running concurrently a situation where there are consequences, and sometimes the ultimate consequence to taking a life or committing a heinous crime.
But how will
They're
you
not
do
mutually
it?
exclusive.
Pratt and Morgan still exists, so how will you do it?
Leela Ramdeen, let's look at this. Let's say we decide, all right, we're no longer going to have the death penalty.
Yes.
And what we're going to do is give them life without parole.
Yes.
Think about the families that would have been distressed by these murderers, who may have had their breadwinner taken away from them. Their lives changed forever, possibly going from a situation of, you know, straitened economic circumstances to extreme poverty, or being fairly comfortable to extreme poverty, never being able to recover from that horrific act that was committed against their family, because it's not just against the victim, it's the whole family. Yes. And then these people trying to pull their lives together, working a job, and their tax dollars are going to make sure that this person lives comfortably in prison. That is abuse. Yeah. That is abuse.
Do you know there's a document which everybody should read by Professor Jeffrey Fagan, Capital Punishment, Deterrent Effects and Capital Costs, in which he actually talks about the costs, that it's more costly to kill people because of all the processes of appeals, etc., than to keep them for life in prison. So, you know, don't take my word for it. He's a professor of law at Columbia Law School. So the cost is not the issue. One of the things that I will say is that society is not meeting the needs, supporting the victims of crime. Quite often, the way in which our criminal justice system works is that we don't look at the victim's needs. Imprisoning or hanging somebody doesn't help the victims. It may help for a little while that, you know, we've got justice, but I'm sure many will think we've got justice if they're locked up for life and you make them work and the money that they earn in prison goes towards the victim.
But that's presuming that they will work in prison, and there's a huge mindset now that there are many people who go to prison and have no problem committing crimes because they know society will take care of them. And if we had to take that paradigm or that thought process, then it may come a time when that population will just be growing and growing and growing, because
which is what other countries have found.
We can't find them. We can't catch them. That's the issue. 44
But at the end of the day, if we take the argument that, well, the death penalty is abolished, and these young men know there is no final consequence like that, no ultimate consequence. Well, many of them, and we spoke to a guy who was incarcerated last night, do not want to come out. They are very comfortable committing the crime and staying in prison because, well, I do have to work. Society will take care of me, and even if I am forced to work, it's really minuscule work, and I'm taken care of for the rest of my life.
Let me tell you about deterrent. You know, the Peter Hart, the Hart Associates poll in America in 1995, they asked commissioners of police across America, is the death penalty a deterrent? What would be a deterrent? You know what they thought? The death penalty, in fact, came last. They said, no, no deterrent. What they found was a deterrent is swift justice. We don't have swift justice.
And
The
sometimes
criminologists.
swift justice and criminologists will always say swift justice includes, and inclusive of the death penalty, the crime must be detected quickly,
Yeah.
the crime must be prosecuted quickly, the
Yeah.
processes must be quick, and of course the punishment must fit the crime.
Funny you should say that. I've got here.
And they must work together.
From the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology, 88% they did a survey of top criminologists in America do not believe that the death penalty is a proven deterrent to homicide. The Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology. So even the criminologists realize
and very
it's
often the
not.
criminologists admit that is because the system has broken down in some parts and not all the parts are working in concert.
No, this is based on the empirical data, not answered on the basis of their understanding of empirical research. So it's not their own feeling,
We
etc.
unfortunately run out of time.
But we have to continue the debate.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you very much.
Thank you for
talking to
inviting me.
Leela Ramdeen, the
Thanks.
spirited discussion on the merits and demerits of the death penalty in Trinidad and Tobago. We'll take a short break and then come back and focus on the spiritual short about the system and the education of their children. That and